Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is Accelerating Your Literature Review with NVivo, focused on the Mac edition. My name is Stuart Robertson, and it's a pleasure to be your host today. A couple of housekeeping things. We will be presenting some background information via PowerPoint and moving into the software to demonstrate a few of the tools that can be applicable for the literature review. I do have colleague Alex who is monitoring the question panel. So if questions do arise, please feel free to send them via the question panel. And toward the end of the presentation, he'll present the questions, or I'll review the questions and answer as many as I can online. But if we cannot get to all of them, uh, we will follow up with the questions that may be left. The PowerPoint for today is available in the handout section. So you do have access to that, and you will be able to download that if you wish. There will be, if I'm not mistaken, a recording of today's session made available um, to you for review, or also have it available if there are others who might not have been able to physically be with us today. Let me go ahead here and get things started. Uh, just to let you know, as I said, my name is Stuart Robertson. I'm an NVivo trainer and consultant. Um, I have been working with NVivo now for about 18 years. So I've seen many changes, and each of the iterations just keeps getting better and better. This is also done as part of the NVivo community. So NVivo QSR, under right now the guidance of Stacy Penna, is creating a community to try to network of people from across organizations within and outside of disciplines, and create a community of practice to connect people together to help the movement of not only the use of NVivo, but just qualitative research in general, and how can we keep that improving as a group. And towards the end of our presentation today, there will be, again, another connection point for you to be able to reach out to that community. And Stacy will prepare a little bit, will tell a little bit more about it. When you think about the research process in general, uh, and you're moving NVivo in, you want to be able to manage data and be able to manage the process so that you're making the most of what you have available. There are options within NVivo to automate things as transcription, or to provide automated insights. The NVivo Plus, the Windows version, does have some abilities for automated coding. Both thematic and sentiment analysis are available in the Plus version, in the Windows version of NVivo. Regardless of the version you're using, though, that adds a rigor to the work that you're doing, the coding, the queries that you're doing, your ability to be able to ask more intricate questions and be able to take your data and look at it through different lenses, view it through different lenses. Being able to share your findings, be it through maps, charts, or visualizations. Collaborate with colleagues, work as part of teams, and ultimately it's an iterative process. So you find that you're going to be going through this throughout the work that you do within your project. And today in particular, we'll start to look at how the literature review can be a starting point within the software to become an intricate part of this process. There's a wide variety of types of data that NVivo supports, from traditional documents, text, rich text, .doc, docx, PDFs, which PDFs being extremely helpful when you're thinking about articles that you may be using within a literature review, to being able to accept files from a number of popular bibliographic softwares, Zotero, RefWorks, EndNote, and Mendeley, as you're looking at, but also being able to, as your work progresses, work with audio, video, Excel, social media data, being able to work with SPSS data for those of you who may be in mixed methods, to survey, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, being able to coordinate with those as well. It's a very robust software, meaning that it can coordinate or fit into the work that you're doing throughout the research process from the very beginning to the very end. When you think about the literature review, you want to be able to import the libraries that you're using, to organize the articles, and of course be able to analyze the articles and readings that you have been gathering. Looking at it for potential themes or topics within that data, being able to link what you find in the literature review to your data, and gather tools to help you jumpstart that analysis approach. There are queries within NVivo that will help you quickly discover themes or explore relationships between themes, looking for points of connection. Uh, Once you are pulling together the findings, being able to compare and contrast with literature. What is your data showing? What did the literature show? I know from personal experience that there were a couple of key areas, especially in my dissertation work, where the literature suggested that there should be some data around topics. And when I'm going through my own review, there was little or none there. So it invited me to be able to go back into my findings and add that component as to why might that be. And again, having your data organized in a single location, I found that to be incredibly helpful, so that in the moment when a question popped into my head, or I began to remember about a particular point that I thought I had made, everything was in my project, everything was right there, and I could quickly double check myself, and became aware of some things that I might have missed should my data have been scattered in a number of different places, from file cabinets to different articles to different journals, etc. Being able to report, expediently write about themes and generate rich visuals, to be able to collaborate with colleagues, that I could take some of the work that I've done and perhaps export it into a Word document to get feedback, or create a chart to look at the distribution of coding across different topics or different areas of interest. Today's session, we'll look at importing sources, we'll look at coding on PDFs, utilizing externals, using nodes and cases in the literature review. Some of you may be familiar with those concepts in terms of data analysis, but there are some ways that you can simply tweak your thinking about them, and making them fit very nicely with the literature review. The lexical and coding queries, being able to make the use of the tools that allow you to delve into unstructured non-numeric data, in this case, i.e. the articles and such that you're looking at, and being able to try to identify either potential key topics, key ideas, or locate where these ideas may be in the literature so you can more efficiently review and conceptualize what your literature is telling you. And finally, being able to start to visualize your data and the information that you have in front of you. NVivo does support the full literature review process. Oftentimes, we forget that it is a process. We think about it in terms of I'm going to collect the literature that speaks to this topic, but you need to be able to get the most out of that literature from beginning steps in organization, collect and managing articles to just searching in the literature itself. But there also needs to be that interpretation and analysis of what is the literature saying. Being able to read and comment on what's there, interpreting and analyzing. I think about the idea that we often sit with highlighters and write notes in the margins, which is a way of capturing these things. The hurdle or the challenge becomes that we have all of this great information spread across multiple documents, physical documents, um, and pulling it all together can be somewhat challenging. Being able to identify gaps or relations or variations in the literature. Gaps, especially, I think about in terms of not only those of you who are doing academic work, but those of you who are applying for grants and doing the literature review to be able to have an organized way to collect evidence that there are gaps. We're so used to looking for something that sometimes we forget we have to look to see where there's nothing and how important that can be. And again, being able to review and have that information as you're writing and updating um, the work that you're undertaking or are currently involved in. You can collect and manage information in one place. As we talked about, being able to actually have PDFs of articles that you may be reading, to have information that you gathered and perhaps initially organized and EndNote, RefWorks, Mendeley, Zotero, to be able to use InCapture because some of our information may be out there on web pages, to be able to capture those and bring those in into your project. And of course, our good old standby, our traditional sources that are non-electronic. There's so much good out there that we want to find a way to incorporate it into NVivo. And although we may not be able to physically make the book appear inside of our computer, we certainly can take and use our traditional note-taking processes in such a way that they become an integral part of the projects that we're doing and having those pieces in there. Because we are working with literature through different lenses, uh, the lexical queries, the text search query, the word cloud. For visual people, the word cloud is a wonderful way to open your eyes literally to what may be there. And the text search to help pinpoint areas that might need particular attention and review within that. Um, the idea, we do talk about auto coding by theme. We use this for both our Windows and our Mac version. Currently, the Windows version does have auto coding capabilities that are not yet available within the Mac version. However, that being said, the fact that I can do a word cloud and then from there run a text search query gives me a jump start onto being able to make the most of the time that I spend stepping into my literature. organize and analyze beyond what's possible manually. Um, Using these tools are going to quickly get me into my articles and can help me target specific areas to be able to create nodes and gather together those pieces that I need to focus on and be able to, instead of spending a large amount of energy on just locating it, if I can use these tools to help me more quickly and efficiently locate information, I can then expend my energy on making sense of it. And that's the key. As the researcher, that's what I strongly bring to this, is the ability to make meaning. And I want to use my attention and my time in doing that. Being able to create annotations and have it right there at a click of the mouse to be able to see it, to have memos so that in the moment as all of these thoughts are welling up inside of me, I can capture them and keep them right within that one project. To be able to go through that process of reading and annotating, using word frequencies, coding the material, looking for possible patterns, making notes of what I'm seeing and perhaps questions that are being generated, which lead me back into the reading and the annotating and repeating the process so that I get the most out of the time that I spend and the information that I've gathered. And there are powerful tools that can help you discover gaps or relationships or variances within the data. Right here, we're looking at the explore diagram where I may be looking at the term, the concept of modality, which will be part of the sample project that we'll be dabbling in. And being able to see what authors have talked about this. Are there authors that I expected to see that aren't represented in this diagram? Do I need to go back and revisit some of those articles? Am I looking at where have I made notes about this? Have I created memos? And maybe I need to go back and refer to what were some of the questions raised within here. Also looking at sources, different PDFs I may have available, or different external uh, proxy documents. Uh, Not only can I see what's here, not only can I see, are there certain authors that have talked about this? And maybe I need to see what other topics those same authors share. And there are many tools that will allow me to do just that. This is simply one of them. Um, this is also something that I can then turn around and use in presentations, be they dissertation defenses, PowerPoints that I'm doing. I also like the fact of being able to share this information in poster presentations. That one is often overlooked because you're more likely to quickly gather someone's attention with a visual that invites them in to then have conversations with you as a researcher and allows you to share your findings and understandings from the work that you have done. So let me take a moment here and switch over to working within NVivo itself. So I'm just going to leave my PowerPoint for just a moment here and step into NVivo so that we can look at some of these in their full context. Open this up just a little bit more here. So I'm inside of NVivo for Mac. In this case, the first thing that I would do when I was setting up the project is think about the types of data, and in this case, the types of sources that I may be using for my literature review. And when I take a look at the literature, In this example, a number of articles have been brought into the project. For each of these articles, if I open one up here, I can be able to read and interact with that article right within NVivo itself. I can, as you can see here, there are actually memos that have been connected to a particular document. So let me go into looking at my notes and my memos. And that way, while I am reading through a particular document, I can be keeping track of various topics, questions, concerns that I may have. One of the things for those of you who are using your bibliographic softwares, when you import from your bibliographic softwares, if you have collected an abstract or keywords, those can and will be created within a memo. And as I'm reading a particular article, I can always edit. I can turn on the editing capabilities in that memo, and I can gather my thoughts or my questions. Uh, and just as if I'm sitting there with the article and a notebook right next to me, I'm doing that same process. I'm collecting that same information, but the beauty of it is here within NVivo, and I can be aware of being able to open the linked item and being able to work with that particular item within NVivo itself. Just need to, in this case, be able to work with that data and be able to see these things in context. Again, thinking from a very traditional standpoint, if I come across something that I want to make a quick note on, I may not necessarily need a memo, but I may want to just what would be equivalent to scribbling something in the margins. Being able to look at a particular section here and being able to create an annotation. Being able to make those notes so that later on I can go ahead and see what my thoughts were in that particular moment, and being able to later turn on that annotation and be able to search through and see what notes I've made. As a researcher, one of the things that I often like to do when I'm first thinking about the literature that I'm working with the PDFs, I will often go through and do a quick word cloud, be able to go up to my queries, be able to take a look at a word frequency. I can look at all of my files or externals, or what's nice about NVivo, I can focus in on particular subgroups of them. So perhaps in my literature, I want to focus on selected articles. Be able to run the query and be able to see the list of the most frequently used words across those articles. Once that list is generated, I can review that list and see what potential themes, concepts, or ideas have been brought up within the articles of interest. Being able to visualize in terms of a word cloud, being able to see if there are particular terms, particular words that I might want to then see within the full context of the articles that I'm looking at. Maybe I'm looking at the concept of mobile, of mobile devices, of mobile learning, being able to visually see that. By the way, at this point, I can uh, look at the gallery. So I have different ways that I can view that, and I can export these various visuals so that I could then use them in a presentation later on if I wish. Or as I was saying, if I right click on, say, the word mobile and run a text search query, be able to see which articles that particular word is featured in or is coming up within, and being able to look at those references and get a sense of how that particular term is being used. One of the other things that I do like to use, and when I run a text search query like this, is to be able to look at the word tree. The word tree allows me to very quickly see the words leading into and coming out of my keyword of interest. This allows me, for example, to be aware of mobile learning, and being able to see further that I might want to not only be thinking about mobile in terms of the types of technology that are being used, but the mobile learning as a concept in general. And being aware of other possibilities, mobile methodologies, mobile modalities. Here it is talking about the idea of mobile phones in particular. How does that fit into my understanding of new ways of teaching and learning in a more mobile society, in a more less brick and mortar way? I also have the ability to, once I've gathered this, be able to turn this into a node. I can save the results as I can put it in my query results. I'll create the results as a new node. In this case, perhaps I'll move it into my node section, or I may have created a subfolder dealing with emerging types of nodes or themes. And I can create mobile technology. And being able to then look at my node section and see the mobile technology node. And I've now made that part of my project. And from there, I can always go back and delve more deeply into this. So for example, if I look at the files literature and go back to this particular source, and now my focus can be on those areas. And I can decide where I want to perhaps extend some of the coding that has been done, thinking about the idea of a highly mobile lifestyle. So I may want to code that selection. I'll code it at a new node, and I'll call it mobile lifestyle. And as I'm doing this, I can also be uh, taking and creating a structure within my nodes, looking for subtopics and building that framework that allows me to think about what is the data, what in this case, or what is the literature telling me? what are the major themes? What are the sub themes that are coming? Where can I find this information? And the nice thing is I can be organizing it so that when I'm ready to write my lit review, I basically have started creating a framework from which, or a graphic organizer from which to begin that writing process. As I said earlier, I can also create a memo link. I can link a new memo here, and I'm going to call this one Thoughts on Mobile Technology. And now I can, as I'm working and writing and thinking, be able to, for example, I'll use Command Shift T here to put a timestamp in, and thinking about what role does mobile technology play in successful completion of programs. And that might be a question I have now. And as I'm reading, perhaps the information in that node, I can always be coming back and capturing my evolving thoughts so that I've actually basically begun writing that section, and I can clean that up. I can export that and clean that up as I go. I can create various levels. If I'm just looking at a general review of what is there, from definitions to good quotes to what fits with my study, and being able to then perhaps focus then on particular themes that are emerging. So you want to think about, how am I using this literature? In one way, I'm using this literature to provide meaning or structure for why I'm undertaking this project, why I'm undertaking this research. What are the key underlying or foundational pieces? And then I'm also going to move on to thinking about it thematically. So if I've justified why I'm doing this and how this is going to help the current understanding, I then need to move on to what are the themes that I'm going to focus on in this particular piece. When it comes to cases, and I want to talk about that, themes, nodes are where we will usually create data that is thematic or built upon a particular concept. When we move over into cases, cases are specialized nodes. And these specialized nodes are built around units of our analysis. In a traditional study, and we may be thinking about our units of analysis, maybe people we interviewed, or organizations we're studying, or regions of a country that we're looking at. When we think about this in terms of the literature review, more often than not, it's around authors. Although I have had worked with people who've created cases around various groupings of articles. I often find that authors are probably one of the main areas. The reason being is that we may have multiple articles from an author or a group of authors. Sometimes I will create cases, excuse me, cases because I have a certain pair or group of authors that have written multiple articles together. And I want to be able to collect all of their works in one place so that later on, if I wanted to try to identify which author or author groups are my go-to people for a particular topic, I have a mechanism to do that, and I'll actually show you how I would go about that in a moment. But when you're thinking about authors um, and creating them as cases, this is probably one of the differences. Those of you who've used NVivo for traditional research for the studies themselves, this might be a slight variation that your units of analysis may actually be your authors and or articles, depending on how you're doing it. But you want to be able to pull together all of the work from a given author or author group, because there may be time periods on one level that you want to see which authors are your go-to people. On another level, you may also want to see, did the author's views change over time? And being able to quickly access their works in one place can be extremely helpful for that piece. For those of you who might not be as familiar with Mac, I just wanted to point one thing out. As you've seen, I've opened up some different windows here. I just want you to know that you can access those windows in the lower left-hand corner, uh, and or you can close windows that you may not need in that same open items area, just so that you're aware of that piece. One of the things that I mentioned a moment ago was the fact that I might want to see which authors are talking about which topics. And one way that I can do that is to be able to go into my queries, where the word frequency can give me a listing of frequently used words, where the text search query can help me find keywords or phrases that I'm looking for. Once I've done some of this coding, I might turn to something, for example, such as the matrix coding query. And it allows me to create a matrix in this example where my rows might be various authors that are of interest. And I'll just use the plus sign here and select some items. I can take a look into my cases, and depending on the cases that I've created, such as my authors, I can select any or all of those authors. And in the columns of my matrix, I can select items of interest. In this case, I can look at my nodes and look at my literature themes. Being able to look at control and learning, motility, network spaces, and tools, and create a matrix and begin to, in my view area, I'm going to add a little shading so I can start to see some of my peaks and valleys. And I can start to see who are my authors, who are my go-to authors about certain topics based on the coding that I have. What I also like about this in terms of having this matrix, I can see where there may be, at least in these authors, haven't talked about control or tools. I may then need to go or decide that I want to go out and check for more authors, or perhaps I created one of these nodes or both of these nodes as areas of focus of my particular study, and having this as a point to use as evidence that supports the need for the work that I'm about to undertake. But I can also now see for what has been coded, I can double click on a particular cell and be able to see the references that were coded to that particular node from that particular author. And everything is right there for me, and I am linked right back to the source, and then I can see what has been coded within the context of the full article. This is where the power is, because I can quickly see a collection of different quotes from different articles in one place, and then move back right into full context. And if I have memos, if I have annotations written about these pieces, I can click on them and see them, and I'm right here in my same chair. So my mind can now begin to look for these connections. I've got memos to record what my mind is seeing, and it's always right here. I'm not going to have to stop what I'm doing, go somewhere else, find something else, and then bring it back and try to get back into that groove. And I think that's where, when you start looking at some of these pieces, it becomes so important. Along those same lines, if I go and I look at my themes, I may want to be able to explore what's happening within my project. And for example, I'm looking at, under tools, I'll look at ubiquitous computing. Interesting concept. And I might want to quickly see who's talking about that. There are 5 different files that have been coded there. And I can say ubiquitous coding, come up to my Explore tab, and use an Explore diagram to begin to see, all right, who is talking about it? Who is connected to this particular piece? And I might see that there is a particular article, the qualitative report, mobile and cloud qualitative research apps. I might then want to see, well, I know ubiquitous coding was in there, but what other topics were there? And I can change the focus from ubiquitous coding to that particular article. And now I can see I also have cloud, apps, tools, spaces. Those were all topics that have coding within this same article that was dealing with the concept of ubiquitous coding. And I might then want to continue to explore, where does that lead to with spaces? What articles were talked about in that top of spaces? And like, wow, all right, that is quite a lot of information here. And maybe I'd like to focus on the files coded. So there were more articles that talked about spaces than talked about ubiquitous coding. So although there seems to be some connection there, I might want to see, I might want to identify from here articles that talked about ubiquitous coding that appear there as well. So I might want to see who talked about ubiquitous coding and spaces. Well, I've got a diagram for that. If I go to Explore and I go to a comparison diagram and I compare nodes, and I'll go into my nodes pieces here, into my literature themes, and so I have spaces and ubiquitous computing. So I'll do, this is my ubiquitous coding. I'm going to use my command key and choose spaces, select those two, and wow, there's a lot in there. Let me take and turn off some of my cases here and be able to zoom in on seeing what is there. And I can see that I do have 4 articles that have coding for both spaces and ubiquitous computing, but only one that talked about ubiquitous coding without spaces. And now I'm beginning to see, what are these articles saying? Where do I need to go in? And I'm hoping you can see how from one explore diagram, looking at one particular topic, I've now made myself aware of some possible connections and or disconnects between what's happening within these. And again, from any of these, I can always open that item and begin to review that item in particular and see what's happening in there. One of the things that I do want to be uh, cognizant of time, one of the things I do want to touch upon, I mentioned externals, that if I have some information that I cannot or choose not to bring into my project, I can create an external. And I'm going to call it, I might call this one uh, notes from a particular book. I can make a note of the location. Maybe it's in my office on my third shelf down if I wish. And here I can take notes from my readings. And although I can't physically have the book in the project, I certainly could have my notes. I could have quotes that I've made. One thing I will tell you from a user perspective, wisdom born of pain moment, if you take a quote out of the book, make sure you note the page. I've taken the quotes out and then I'm going, what page was that on? Um, that's just a wisdom born of pain heads up. But then I can code this information just like I'm coding the information in the articles, and being able to bring to know where those pieces go, where those thoughts are, and then be able to also incorporate that in as I start looking at some of my writing. Let me minimize this for a moment because I do want to make sure that we have a chance to filter in some questions and such. I'm just going to go ahead and go back to my PowerPoint for a moment. Again, being able to collect, easily import from multiple sources, using queries, coding, and visuals to find the keywords and possible themes. Ask questions of your coding, keeping memos and annotations. Being able to expand the literature sources to find gaps in the visuals, and then using those memos to begin to start to write along those lines, and beginning that whole process. And again, there are full solutions of transcription is available, although not so much for your literature review, but as you move in perhaps to your interviews. NVivo 12 for Mac, having access to training and consultancy resources that are available to you as well. And NVivo, I said QSR is looking for creating a community to connect with fellow researchers. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Penna to talk a little bit more about that initiative.
Oh, great. Thanks, Stuart. Great webinar. So hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Penna, and I'm the NVivo Community Director here at QSR. And so I've created, and in the process of creating an NVivo community, as Stuart mentioned at the beginning, really to connect you to your fellow researchers. And it's a global network. We're reaching out within disciplines, across organizations, and really want to create a community of practice in regards to qualitative and mixed methods research. If you want to join the community, feel free to email me. It's at the bottom of the slide, s.penna, and there is a link. So in your chat area in the GoToWebinar, I did put the link that you could just go to right from this webinar, and just let us know if you're interested in learning more about it. And some of the things we're doing, for example, are this webinar series. We're also doing podcasts. We're going to have an online forum and ways to create NVivo research networks at your organization. So thanks, Stuart, for that. Let me do that little plug, and we'll continue, and we'll go to questions.
Great. And
Okay.
if I just wanted to point out, well, questions, if any are coming in, there are upcoming webinars, and I will leave that up so that people can see some of the things that Stacy was referring to.
Excellent. Okay,
Sorry,
so
Alex.
that's okay. We have a few questions here. So I guess the first question we have is, I'm mainly here to learn about case classification and management. Would be great to kind of have a deeper look at that, if possible.
That, in terms of the literature review, that one is not as pertinent.
Okay.
But there are some wonderful YouTube videos that do talk a lot about that. So I would say that for the context of this one, it doesn't, unfortunately, doesn't really fit.
Okay. The next question was around nodes. Can you show the nodes under general again?
Let me see if let me swap back to my screen here. There we go. Should have it up momentarily. All right, there we go. Lit review and nodes under general. And so those are back up.
Okay. So the next question was, do you recommend keeping the lit review in a separate NVivo project or integrating it with other data in the qualitative project?
In a lot of ways, that is a personal call. I've worked with people who've done it both ways. Personally, I like keeping it within the same project because it allows for me to more easily access what the literature says and what my data says. So that way, if I've coded the literature and my data to the same set of nodes, I can open up a node and see both the literature and my responses. I also become very quickly aware as to whether I have more leanings from my data versus my literature or vice versa, which may make me aware of where my particular participants may have veered off from what the literature says. So I prefer to keep them together.
Okay, just a reminder that the questions tab is over on the GoToWebinar control panel. If you have any more questions, we've got one question at the moment. Are there plans to add auto-coding functionality to the Mac version of NVivo?
For myself, I work outside of QSR, so I have to say honestly, I do not know one way or the other with that one.
Okay, that was the last question.
Okay, so anything else? I'll just check in.
There we go, there's another one. Would you use a subfolder format for nodes, etc., to keep the lit review and data clear?
I would, in the file section, I would use a subfolder format where I might have a folder for my literature, a folder for my project data. Within the nodes themselves, and I know initially this sounds wrong, but I would code both the literature and the data to the same set of nodes. The reason being, especially if I'm looking for gaps, if I have data coded to certain areas and I don't have literature there, then I know there's a disconnect that I need to explore. The reason that doesn't bother me is because later on I can use the query so that if I wanted to say, look at coding from a particular subgroup, if I wanted to look at my data versus the literature, when I was setting up the criteria in a coding query, I could say items in a particular folder. So I could take the folder that was just my literature and focus my query on that for a particular theme. And that way I could very cleanly block out my data. Or vice versa, if I have a folder that's just my data sources, I can then cleanly block out my literature. But I still have that overlapping that is necessary for me to be able to make an informed decision about potential gaps between the literature and the data that I've collected.
Got a couple more questions for you here now. Could you please show how to connect the cases to the documents stroke files?
Absolutely. Couple of options. If I have the files here, one of the things that I can do is once I've brought the PDFs in, I can right click it. I can create as, and I can create as cases. Create as cases, and now in my cases folder, I have a case for each of these authors, and their article is within their case. As I'm looking at that particular piece. That being said, if I find that I bring in a second article by the same author, then I can simply take that article that's come in and I can select that article, and in this instance, I would code the file at an existing case. So if I'm creating cases from scratch here, I can create a case for each of my articles. If I later bring in another article by a similar author, by the same author, I can code that to the author's case. Or if I had two articles by the same author when I created the cases, I always have the ability to take and copy one case and merge it into another. And then I can always go back and delete that initial, or let me delete. I'm having a moment here where I'm not seeing that, but I would cut or delete that particular case. There we go. I'll use the delete key. So that's a way that I could do just that.
Okay, and then the last question, super easy one. How long does it take to learn the software?
Okay, let's see. Well, actually, I will tell you that the mechanics of simply importing and coding, creating the nodes, that I find most people who have a comfort with technology can do that in 2 to 4 weeks. 2 to 4 weeks typically. As you get into some of the advanced queries, that takes a little bit more time. That one may take, maybe 6 to 8 weeks to start to build a comfort level. That being said, one of the best ways to start is to start with the literature, because you already know how to read a literature piece, and often know the topics that you're interested in or the things that you're looking for. So that allows you to focus on the mechanics of how do I physically bring in data, code data, etc. If you jump right in with a study, sometimes that's a little more challenging because you may not have a background in what the data is going to present to you or what you're looking for. You may be doing something very emergent. So the literature review is actually a great way to start. And with a technology comfort, you can be efficiently working, usually in 2 to 4 weeks, at least the very foundational pieces.
Perfect. Well, we're top of the hour now, so we do have one more question, but we'll take that one offline and let people get on with their day.
Well, thank you so much for allowing me to share this. As you can tell, I love this stuff. So hopefully I do hope that it was helpful to those who were able to join us.
Thanks very much, everyone.